So Mark, I can see your screen perfectly. If you're ready to go, go ahead and take it away.
Sounds good. Thank you, Kim. Appreciate everybody being here. There we go. So let's talk about being naked and afraid for just a minute. It's a Discovery Channel website or a Discovery Channel TV show where they take people and they drop them in the jungle, two people who don't know each other. They drop in the jungle naked and they have to survive for 21 days. And frankly, this is how a lot of people feel when they've been told that they're responsible for GP security. They feel like they've been dropped in the jungle naked and afraid. So we don't want you to feel that way. We want to give you the opportunity to figure out how to really take a good hard look at your GP security and how to make it work for you. I talk to lots of CFOs and controllers, and I find that folks are often really kind of unhappy with their GP security. They've maybe it was put in place before they got there, or they've upgraded from GP9 and they have sort of those pseudo roles and have never done anything with them beyond that. So as we run into some interesting things going on in the world, it really becomes more and more important that security be set appropriately inside of GP. So we're going to take a look at security from that standpoint. So whether this is a new implementation for you and you're just coming to GP security, if you're unhappy and want to re-implement it, or you just want to get more out of the security than what you have, today we're going to take a look all the way through that. So also, I guarantee no one will be naked on this webinar today. So just to be perfectly clear, you're allowed to be afraid, but nobody's going to be naked. We do live in an insecure world. The headlines are just full of people, full of incidents that have gone on within companies. One that got a lot of headlines over the last couple of months, a company hired an accountant off of Craigslist, and that person managed to embezzle $15,000 in one day of work. So clearly I am doing something very, very wrong, although she did get caught, so maybe I'm doing something right. But aside from issues of hiring your accountants off of Craigslist, really we want to do what we can to avoid these kinds of incidents inside of your particular business. So we're going to start with just a quick review of GP security and some of the elements that are there, because GP security is more than just roles and tasks inside of GP. You do have the basic GP security, so you have roles, tasks, users, all of that inside of GP, but then SQL Server Reporting Services gives you the ability to report on GP data, and it might be a problem if you give people the ability to report on payroll data who shouldn't have that access. Management Reporter also has its set of security around generating financial statements. This can be extremely important. You don't want folks messing with those building blocks once you've got a good solid set of financial reporting statements. GP Workflow has its own security separate from the main GP security, so we'll talk a minute or two about that. The web client has a couple of security curiosities, and then there may be other integrating products, things that Smart Connect, Integration Manager, another third party, whether that's a GP ISV or some other product that you're integrating back into GP, all of those are going to have their own security pieces that may affect your security around Dynamics GP. So where are we going to start? We're going to start with Dynamics GP. I want to encourage folks, if you have questions, go ahead and add them to the question box as we go along. We should have plenty of time to tackle those and get through them. And Kim, if you're on, if you'll just kind of keep an eye on those for me. It's a little tough to both present and check the questions. I'd really appreciate it.
You betcha.
So I live in Orlando, and we took the kids to Gatorland a few years back, and there's a guy sitting on an alligator, like 6-foot-long alligator, holding its mouth shut just with the guy's hands. The guy looks at the audience and he goes, "What's the most dangerous part of the alligator?" And half the people yell the mouth, and half the people yell the tail, and he sits on this gator holding the mouth and looks at us like we're stupid, and he says, "What part of the gator am I holding?" Clearly, the mouth's the most dangerous part of the alligator. We're going to start with Dynamics GP for the same reason. Security inside of GP really is the most important part of controlling your financial information. Brief review, GP security is pretty straightforward, even though there are a lot of elements to it. Windows, forms, the ability to post reports, those types of things, they all roll up into tasks. The tasks roll up into roles, and then roles get assigned to users. So ultimately, you're just going to assign a role to user. That role is made up of multiple tasks. We're going to follow a really simple process here, just a couple of elements. We're going to spend some time looking at what it takes to really design security, a review of security, how we're going to apply our changes, and then testing and adjustments after that. We're going to walk through this for GP, but this would apply to anything else. So if you really wanted to lock down SSRS or manage process will apply. The big piece that folks really miss when they're looking at GP security is really designing, spending the time thinking about security. It is often left wide open for testing, and that's perfectly fine because you're trying to make sure that folks can do a particular job, that the system accomplishes that job as you work through testing GP. But what happens is then we end up in a rush for implementation, and we take a stab at security, but we don't really spend a whole lot of time developing it. So, but that is the key to getting security right, is spending some time really designing what you want security to look like. So the recommendation really is to take a risk-based approach. So this is a recommendation not just from me, this is a recommendation from all of the audit literature you read, all of the auditors you talk to. The reality is we want you to think about your highest risk processes and items first. The reality is once you have those locked down, it's easier to move to the less risky things. But if we're worried about things like a complex accounts receivable lapping scheme being used to commit fraud, and yet we leave large stacks of cash lying around, we're really not taking a risk-based approach. You've got to tackle the pieces where you are most likely to have issues. That is different based on different organizations. So ideally what you would do is do some business process mapping and say, this is what our process looks like from procurement to payment, and be able to walk through that and see where your risky areas are and where maybe areas of less risk are. So we want to then focus on what those high-risk areas are. We want to look at things like the risks, who might review to in order, so we might choose to accept a risk but then put a review around that. So if that risk does come to fruition, we can say, hey, at least it's not a whole lot of money and we can catch that pretty fast, versus something that is a much higher risk with a lot more money. There is an element of risk and reward here in terms of what kind of processes and how much work we're going to put into particular items. There are going to be some items where we're looking at evidence that folks are doing what they're supposed to do. So if we say someone is supposed to review the payables before they are sent to be, for checks to be cut, we need evidence that someone is actually doing that. If we say folks are supposed to review the bank recs to ensure that they're being done in a timely manner, we need some evidence to make sure that that happens. And then we'll talk a little bit about mitigation. Mitigation is ways to reduce a risk. We may choose to accept that we've got some risks here, but we're going to do some things like a review or something else to really mitigate that risk, especially in an area where we can't afford to lock down security. Maybe we can't afford to properly segregate duties. So let's talk some specifics here. This is an example process map. They're not hard to build. This one's kind of pretty. They don't have to be this pretty. The stuff on the left is really a, we can think of these as a role. But we're really looking at a process. And so if we've got a role on the left, the process is going to move up and down depending on who does a particular step in the process. So it makes it a decent way to get an idea of segregation of duties, of who's doing what, who's responsible. You can visually see, hey, maybe we shouldn't allow that guy who creates the vendor to also be the person who's allowed to cut checks. We should really kind of think about that as we look through our process. Now, it may be that you don't have enough people to do that, but at least you can say, hey, here's our risk, and the guy who can cut vendors is also allowed to cut checks. So what we're going to do is we're going to put in a review. that every time a new vendor is created, a report goes out weekly to someone, and it's their job to review that new vendor list, compare it against invoices, and ensure that these vendors are legitimate. So I'm not suggesting that we've got to go out and hire 40 people, but we've got to be able to understand our process to decide where we're going to apply GP security and where we're going to do something else. So let's talk for a minute about GP security. Security is really role-based. So the problem with the core GP security is that they really weren't designed for segregation of duties. They were designed kind of for letting people get work done, which is perfectly fine, but it means that the GP roles have lots of overlapping permissions. If you look at the AP clerk, there are all kinds of overlapping permissions in that AP function that you wouldn't normally think about giving to someone inside of AP. There are inherent risks and conflicts inside those GP roles. And so if you're just going through and assigning people the GP roles and hoping that they're secure, I'm sorry to disappoint you, there are plenty of holes in those. They really lack some transparency in that there's a description kind of what's going on in there, but to really understand that maybe this role also allows you to post, not just do transactions, you've really got to dig into that role, and most folks never do that. And then we know that there's still some folks out there who converted their security from GP9 to GP10. They don't have real roles. They have sort of pseudo roles that is really just whatever security was assigned to that person. We really want you to be encouraged to move away from that and look at some other options around roles. So there's a red link at the bottom. Kim's got this presentation. She will make sure that everybody gets it. This is a GP security. It is a list of the roles and the associated tasks that is in there. So this is an Excel sheet with all of those pieces, so you can get an idea what's actually sitting in those default roles from a security standpoint and from an understanding standpoint. All of the links in this presentation are marked in red. They are, we've got a bunch of tools for you to be able to grab and download. Most of them are free. There are a couple of paid tools. We're not trying to sell you anything here, but the free tools are just either aren't appropriate or don't get the job done. So you know that at least there is a tool, and you can figure out if those are appropriate for you, then work through them to be able to acquire those items. So we made it really clear this one is free. It's just a download, and it is a list of the GP roles with associated tasks. Just a quick reminder, this is what the role assignment window looks like. You're taking a user, you're assigning them for a particular company, one or more roles underneath that.
Hey, Mark. This is Kim. You're kind of going in and out. It sounds like we're having perhaps some internet audio issues. I don't know if there's anything that you can do about it, being you are at a convention right now.
I
can't even hear you right now, Mark.
All right.
Try it again. I cannot hear you, Mark.
Kim, is this any better?
That's better. All right. Well, Mark is probably...
So...
There we go. Okay, Mark, I can hear you now.
All right. Fantastic. So the better option is to take a task-based approach. The tasks in G are actually really, really well built. They have everything you need for a particular area. The problem in G is that too many tasks are given role. That's where we end up with conflict, in that we give too much permission is being given at that point in time for those particular roles. So the recommendation really is to create your own new roles and those role tasks that. into those new roles. So just a look at it looks like we've got a role in the task. So here's the way this works. A task-based approach, really we're going to match these tasks to new roles. We've got a free download. It's the GP security matrix. Again, is there. It looks like this. So this is just an Excel sheet with multiple tabs. Across the top is a list of all of the default tasks inside of GP. And then on the left, you're able to put in your new roles and just mark an X in the tasks that look appropriate for that role. So this is a way to both document and design security at the same time. And again, that's just a free download. The beauty of this is we want to save those old roles out just in case we run into an issue, someone breaks payroll and we need to give them back the old role temporarily. But you're able to set up brand new roles. They're clean. You're not worried about an upgrade breaking something with in terms of adjusting the roles in GP, and you know that you really control them. There's not a leftover in there from something that Microsoft set up. Another real beauty of this is that this can be phased. So you could say we really want to fix security for the financial side first. We're going to go design the security for the financial module, banking, journal entries, those types of things. Use that portion of the security matrix, go set up security for those users, and be able to walk through the testing and that sort of thing with a subset of users, not with a big bang for the whole company. All right, so why is George Clooney sitting in the middle of my presentation? Well, George Clooney represents a super user. If I have a birthday party for my wife and I have a list of people who are allowed to come to this birthday party or who are expected to come to this birthday party, this is my list of users who have permission to enter. They have explicit permission because they're on the list. If George Clooney shows up, he's not on the list, but I guarantee you he is still getting in and he's going to be able to do whatever it is he wants. That's the role of a power user. So inside of GP, a power user is not a regular user. They don't get specific access to create a vendor or specific access to create a customer. The system just says, hey, you're a power user, you can do anything you want. So if you pull a list of folks who have access to create a customer, your power users don't show up on that list. This is a problem when you go to your auditors and they say, give us a list of everyone who can create customers, and you deliver that list and they look back and say, well, why was this person who is not on the list able to create a customer? 9 times out of 10, that's a power user. So really encourage you not to use power users if you can help it. It is possible to create a super user, and this super user would have explicit access. So they can do the things that a power user can do, but they have explicit access. They actually show up on all of the access reports. I've got a free link to be able to do that. There's some SQL code to make it easy to set that up. So again, that's an option if you want to get away from power users. A couple of other things as we're looking at designing security. Limited and self-service users are a little different in the newer versions of GP. They have limited access and limited abilities, but you can still control their security to an extent. So for example, a limited user can really only view items in GP and do certain discrete transactions like create a requisition. But if you want to lock a set of limited users outside of the purchasing module and just give them access to view things in financial, there are roles and tasks pre-built in GP to allow you to do that. So I'd encourage you to take a look at those for your limited and self-service users. Up next is we're looking at designing security is really thinking about SA. So just to be really clear, for GP 2013 and higher, so anything above GP 2010, the only thing that SA is required for is installation. It is not required for the professional service tools. It is absolutely not required to add users, has not been required for some time. You can add users without being SA. Even for GP 2010 and GP 10, it is still really installation and the professional service tools that require SA, not much beyond that. So the better way to add users is to take a user and give them sysadmin access inside of SQL. And the technical folks will say, well, isn't that the same thing? Instead of being the system administrator, you're just giving them system access. The difference is, because of the way that GP encrypts and controls the password, that user only has system access within the GP application. They do not have the ability to use it to do other things. They can't natively log into SQL. They're constrained by the permissions they have inside of GP and how they interact with SQL. So making them a system administrator in SQL for a GP user login is considerably safer than giving out the SA password. It also makes it much easier to audit who's doing what. So let's say that you've done your work and you've laid out what you think you want your processes to be, or at a minimum you've taken another look at your security and you've reworked through a security matrix, because that'll get you a whole lot closer than what you are today. The next step really is to, whoops, sorry, let me back up just a second. Sorry about that. The next step really is to review this, and the review, you're really looking for, there we go, you're really looking for segregation of duties issues. As we discussed before, can the person who create customers also refund customers? That's not a great idea. And you end up with two kinds of segregation of duties conflicts. So ones that are inside the role, we really hope to minimize those by building new roles, because there are absolutely conflicts in the built-in ones. And then conflicts because a user has multiple roles. So we give them the vendor creation role and we give them a role that allows them to cut checks. There, we've created our own conflicts by giving them multiple roles. Depending on the size of your organization, you may actually just be able to do that visually, looking at the items in the security matrix or by reviewing a business process. But sometimes you need to go deeper than that. And so one of the tools is Fastpath's Assure product, which has a set of segregation of duties conflicts built for GP, and it will search through your security and it will show you where all of your conflicts are and allow you to apply a mitigation, those types of things. I've looked at a bunch of free tools around this, and the challenge becomes that the free tools are very, very generic, and then taking those free tools and trying to apply them to what's going on in GP becomes a really difficult exercise. This is one of the few areas where really a paid tool ends up being the right answer. A couple of tips: you will not be able to make everything conflict-free. Even if you hire enough people to do that, your processes will be way too inefficient. So this is where the risk-based approach becomes important. If someone can create a customer, but they can also refund a customer, but historically you do 3 refunds a year, then you may not need to go all out with security, certainly not on day one. You may be able to put in a review, a monthly review of refunds, so that if something does go wrong, at least you catch it before the amount's too high. But you're also not spending a fortune protecting against something that is less likely to happen. You can also design some conflict mitigations here. These are things like reviews. You have options to get segregation of duties outside of the organization. Positive pay and safe pay is one of those. So we tell the bank, these are the checks we actually cut. That makes it a whole lot harder for someone to take a check and fraudulently change it. Last thing here, once you've really designed your security, before you go willy-nilly and apply it, you really want some folks to look at it and get some sign-off that, yep, we're going to change security here for these people. Once you've got this, applying security actually becomes one of the easiest steps. You're just going to take that security matrix, you're going to create the new roles that are on there, and you're going to check the boxes for the tasks. So it's really not that big a deal. And then when you're done, you assign those roles to users. We do want to temporarily preserve the existing roles. And the beauty of this is, again, it can be phased. So you can say, we're just going to tackle AP, or we're just going to tackle purchasing. This makes this process a whole lot easier. The reality is, if your security is a mess today, you're not going to fix it tomorrow. So if you can take the riskiest areas and fix those in some type of order, you're at least making progress and pushing the risks to the less risky areas. After that, we're going to do some testing. The testing is actually optional. Some folks choose to skip it. I prefer to do it so that we can test that these roles and tasks work. We're going to verify the roles and user assignments. Ideally, you have a test environment, but a test company will work as well. For test companies, the ability to copy security works really well because you can set it in the test company and then just go to a user and say, copy security, and move that to your production company. For test servers, you really have to copy the table data from the test server to the production server, assuming that you don't want to go and reset security. And so we've got a link here on some information on how to do that. If that's something that looks like it's beyond what you want to do, I'm sure that Interdyne BMI can help you walk through those pieces too. Last but not least, in terms of our process, is really adjust. Nobody ever gets security right on the first try. When you do this, the key is to have folks available for support so that when you get that call, I can't do this thing that I used to be able to do, then folks are there either to be able to fix it in security or to be able to say, hey, you're not allowed to do that anymore, remember the new process, or hey, we just truly missed that one, we need to go back and fix that. So it's not just a matter of being able to adjust. You may need some folks who can make a decision about security in that process as well. Also, fully expect delays here. There will be processes and people that you've missed. That person who goes in once a month and runs one thing in order to grab a number off the bottom, often those are the kinds of things that get missed and they pop up in month end and they're a crisis. So even though you think you've got it nailed down, it may be a month or two before all of the bugs are kind of out of that. All right. For the adjustment phase, GP Power Tools, this is the support debugging tool. It was free as the support debugging tool. It is now a paid product. If you're interested in this, Interdyne BMI can help you with that. This is David Musgrave's suite of GP utilities that include security tools. And when access gets denied to a window, this is absolutely the best tool I have found, bar none, for figuring out what that window is, why they were denied security, and what we need to do to them get them security. This includes, it can help with moving items from a test server to a production server, for example, and it's really, really helpful. If a user gets denied, they can actually save off that message, send it to an administrator who can pull it up inside of GP and drill back and see, okay, these are the items that have security to this item. These are the elements that the user has security to. How do I make those two things mix so that they do get appropriate security? Just a quick brief look at the security profiler, and we've got a really detailed message there on the left. It even tells us that access was denied in field service, so I know that that's where I need to go, not inside of GP for the security adjustment. All right, some real-life pieces before we move on to the other items. This is not necessarily a fast process. It is a project. I'm not going to kid you. You're not going to do this in a weekend unless you have a really small set of users. However, I have been on the receiving side where I had to go in and help a company that experienced a failure in internal controls where the auditors could not rely on their controls. All of their financial reporting to the SEC was delayed 2 to 3 months, and the amount of money that they spent in about 6 months to get that fixed was absolutely ridiculous. It's just it was the wallet was open and money just poured out. It is so much cheaper to get this fixed on the front end than to suffer some type of internal control failure on the back end. And as you're looking at security, don't ignore mitigation options. We've talked about this a little bit. Having someone review a report, review vendors that have been set up once a week or once a month, using things like SafePay to give you additional control from an outside perspective. There are all kinds of options there, and one of them is field level security. So GP includes field level security that lets you do things like before a user can push a button, they have to put in a password. So this is one way that as you're looking through your security, if you find something where you're trying to decide between hiring something and making an adjustment, sometimes field level security can really make that work, give you enough of a control there that you're not having to go out and hire someone, and yet you still feel like you've got this item under control. So we looked at this process. We designed, we reviewed, we applied, we tested, adjusted. This works for all of the other products we walked through too. We're not going to walk through them all quite at that level, but we're going to try to hit the highlights of what's really important in some of these other products that connect to GP. But these 5 items work just fine if you're trying to control SSRS security or management reporter. It's just probably a much shorter and smaller project to make that happen. All right. So with SSRS, SSRS security is Active Directory based, so you're using people's network logins. And essentially you're assigning security to a report or a report group, a report folder. My experience is that most people just go ahead and assign permission to the entire folder. If you have rights to payroll, you have rights to everything in payroll. That's not absolutely required. That's just what seems to be most common. You can limit it down to individual reports. Also, SSRS can use Active Directory groups. Actually, all of the Active Directory things we're going to look at today can use Active Directory groups. And the way this works is you set up a group in Active Directory. That group gets set security inside of SSRS. So instead of having to go and set up each user, you just take that user and drop them in the appropriate Active Directory group, and their security to SSRS or Management Reporter or anything else works appropriately. So let's say that I want to have 2 groups, an AD group for SSRS no payroll and an AD group for SSRS only payroll. When I have a new user, I don't have to go and give them access to financial and to purchasing and all of those others. I can just drop them into the no payroll group, and they'll have access to all of the SSRS pieces without having to do, but not payroll, without having to do a whole lot of setup. Management Reporter is interesting. Management Reporter has enough challenges with data not moving that you really want people, you don't want your reports to change. So the control element here is really more around who can control building blocks and pieces of this report. There's, again, Management Reporter is Active Directory based. The groups work. Many people have never seen this window, but there's actually a control area in Management Reporter where you can set things like not just folks access to generate reports, but their ability to drill back into GP, whether they can create reports, what access they have to building blocks. All of that is controllable inside of Management Reporter security. The new workflow starting in GP 2013 also has its own security. And again, this is Active Directory based because you may have approvers who are not users inside of GP. So the workflow is going to go out, and these users are going to either log in via Active Directory to make an approval, or they're going to get an email and they're going to be able to approve directly from an email. So when I look at security around workflow, the key in my mind is really around the managers, because manager is a setup inside of workflow, and the managers have the rights to create new workflows, adjust those workflows, change the amounts that are in the workflows, assign who the approval users are going to be and what their levels are going to be. So you really, really want to limit the workflow managers. And then just one more tip around that. Workflow uses Active Directory email, whatever email is set in Active Directory. For most of you, that's no big deal. It's going to be correct. But if users are missing in Active Directory, if they don't have an email set there, or if that email is set incorrectly, they're not going to get the emails for approvals. So just a quick look. Here's the security window. We see we have one manager, and that's me. This is really where you want to limit the number of folks who can create and adjust workflows. And then in the window at the bottom, we see that this has been assigned to someone to be the approver. This is the type of thing that the manager would do, is assigning those approvers and what actually makes up those workflow. Workflow is another area where you want to spend a little time designing it and definitely get a sign-off there. You'd hate to think that folks can approve stuff at 5,000 and it actually ends up being 50,000 because someone made a mistake and it wasn't reviewed. The web client, this really applies at this point to the web client through GP 2015. I don't have enough on the HTML client yet to confirm all of these, but it should be pretty similar. Web client uses a mix of Active Directory and GP security. So Active Directory is used to connect to the website and say you have permission to connect to the website, and then GP security is used in order to pass the authentication through. It is possible GP's Identity Manager program for the web client only will let you pass those items through where you log in with Active Directory and it logs you directly into GP. This only works for the web client. It can be tricky to set up, but it is there. And for those of you who are used to regular GP security, it is possible to have a web client user that is not a SQL user, so they will not exist at all in SQL Server. When you look at the login window, there's a checkbox under class ID that says web client user only, no SQL Server account. And when you check that box for a user, it actually activates the directory tab to be able to do the setup for that particular user. So that's just a difference when you're digging into security. If you don't see these users in SQL, they may be web client only users. And then we want to be careful with other integrating systems. So if we've said that Kim, who we love dearly, should not be allowed to create journal entries because Kim has way too much power already, so we don't want her to be able to create journal entries. But yet we give her permission to another system, CRM, some other integrating system, and she's able to create a journal entry that way. That starts to create a problem for us. You think about the ability to create customers. A lot of that happens in other systems like a CRM, or some type of ordering system that then passes through the GP. Sometimes vendor creation happens in a requisition module that then gets passed through in GP. So you don't want people to be able to accidentally do things in GP through a third party. So once you've got your GP security set and you're looking at these third parties, you'll have your security matrix to use that as kind of a guide as you look at setting up security in other integrating products. I'm going to take some questions here in just a sec. I'm the Director of Client Services for Fastpath. All we really do is security, audit, and compliance. GP is a huge piece of what we do. Once you've got your security set, we also have a bunch of tools that can help you keep it set. Assured segregation of duties. We can audit changes that happen so that once you've got it good and set, if folks make changes, you'll know who did what. And we can help you with setting up initial customers. Things like Identity Manager lets you request a setup, and Config AD does single sign-on for both the web client and the desktop client. So you get a consistent view for all of your folks. But really this was around getting security to the point that you can be comfortable that you understand what's going on inside of your security and to try to give you a roadmap and a plan to be able to get there. So Kim, do we have any questions at this point?
We do, and you're right. You don't want me in your GP. It was tough enough to use QuickBooks on my husband's business. There was no security there, I'll tell you that. All right, everybody. So on the right-hand side, you're going to find the question area. Let's type in the questions that you would like to ask Mark. Here is our first one. It goes, posting processes in particular is not isolated in the same way in all tasks. Make it more difficult to restrict postings for a new user during their install training period. Posting permissions for receivables versus sales order processing versus AP. Suggestions? Is this changing in GP 2016?
So I'm not aware of any changes in GP 2016 at this point. There are a couple of options. Posting is absolutely its own thing. So it is a it is the equivalent of a window, so it can be pulled out of tasks. It is possible to isolate posting into just its own task. So you could choose to have a role that includes posting and a role that does not include posting as an option. If this is a temporary item, there may be some other possibilities to extend posting. So field level security would let you grab that posting button, and unless they have a password, they're not able to push the button. So the password could only be available to folks who've been with the company for a particular period of time, as an example.
Good suggestion. Excellent. Excellent. All right. Password expiration is unpredictable in our GP environment. Passwords can expire in the middle of data entry session, resulting in errors that do not point back to the real issue of an expired password. Is there a way to allow users to be more productive with their own password changes, especially if they would like to cinch the dates of their password changes for other applications?
Sure. So the challenge is that it's really SQL Server at that stage that is controlling the password expiration, and SQL Server doesn't have a dialog box that the password has expired, so nothing gets passed through to GP. So that's absolutely correct. When it expires, it just expires. For example, our Config AD product at Fastpath is designed to handle that, but it also, even better, works with Active Directory. So your GP login is tied to your Active Directory login. So when your network login expires, you change it there. It changes it for the pass-through to GP, and in most cases, that's changing it for just about everything that you're signing into. We find that's the route that most people end up going, is a tool like Config AD to really manage that.
Good, good, good. All right, Melody asked the questions. Do web client users take up, hold on here, take up a seat in GP when they log in? Example, if you have a license for 30 users.
In most cases, yes. The only the exception to that are the limited or the self-serve users. And so a limited or a self-serve user burns a limited or self-serve license, and what they can do is very limited. In most cases, it's either viewing data or very specific data entry, so they can enter a timesheet, for example. But if a regular user logs in, they will absolutely use a GP license.
Excellent. I would love to see a graph out there, Mark, that explains all the users, because you mentioned a couple I didn't think of, so to speak, naming, power user and super user here today. So it is very confusing, isn't it?
It is.
Here's another one. Hunter says, specifically, how do you combine GP users with 80 users using pass-through, or is that not possible? I heard it might be possible with CRM. That's it.
So in GP, you can do some form of pass-through with the web client only. You cannot do it at all on the desktop client without a third party. Our Config AD product is designed to do just that. It effectively, you do not need your GP user and password. Your Active Directory passes through using a GP user invisibly to the user. So you can log in to your network and either go directly into GP or have to put in your network login back into GP. But essentially at that point, all of the login piece is being controlled using Active Directory. Users aren't having to remember a GP password. There's no way to do that without a third party, and Microsoft has been very explicit that they will not be making that adjustment in the desktop client.
All right. Tim made the comment, I too would like to see a graph of all the different users and their access. And Tim, I did too. I even reached out to Microsoft to see if there was such a beast, and I haven't been able to track one down. So it's on my wish list, something I hope to get my hands around, because I think it'd be very useful. Here's another one from Hunter. It says, Config 80. Awesome. Thanks. That's exactly what I was looking for.
Yep, and just to be clear, because sometimes I talk funny, it's Config AD as in Anno Domino, not as in 80.
All right, thank you. All right, Mark, you answered all the questions. Again, as always, you do such a great job, and it's really fun to hear the passion behind your voice on security because it's so important for folks. So again, if you have specifics that you would like to learn about with GP, you can get in touch with us. Excuse me. Or Mark here at this email address.
That's it.
Thank you so much.